The year 1241. Krakow was engulfed in flames, its ancient streets devoured by fire. The blaze surged skyward along wooden walls, consuming everything in its path. Dying screams merged with the thunder of hooves, and above it all echoed a sound that would haunt Europe for generations. The war cries of Mongol riders sweeping through the heart of Poland like a scythe through wheat. Bodies lay scattered across the streets, some still clutching weapons they never had the chance to use. Poland's grandest city, abandoned in panic by its inhabitants, fell without a struggle. This was just the beginning. Yet, this narrative departs from other tales of Mongol conquests you may have encountered. It's not a story of inevitable defeat, nor another chronicle of invincible armies crushing all opposition. What transpired in Poland was a rarity worldwide. Twice the Mongols arrived, and twice Poland succumbed. But the third time, that's where everything diverged. Imagine standing on Kaun's walls in December 1287, 46 years after that initial nightmare, watching a new Mongol army approach. You'd heard your grandfather's stories. You'd know what these warriors did to your city, your people, and every kingdom that dared to resist them. Yet this time, something felt different. This time, the walls beneath your feet weren't made of wood. This time, Poland had learned. This time, Poland was prepared. The pivotal question, resonating through history, is straightforward. What had changed? How did a fractured, disunited kingdom transform into a force capable of achieving what the powerful kingdoms of Hungary, Rus, and countless others could not? How did Poland become the anvil that finally shattered the Mongol hammer? To grasp this victory, we must return to its origins. We must comprehend how truly formidable the enemy was, and how complete Poland's initial defeat had been. For the transformation from victim to victor is one of the most astonishing stories of medieval warfare, and it begins with utter catastrophe. The 13th century Mongol Empire stood as the largest contiguous land empire in human history. From the rice paddies of Vietnam to the frozen forests of Rus, from the deserts of the Middle East to the steppes of Central Asia, one people conquered more territory than the Romans could ever dream of, accomplishing it in less than a single generation. These weren't mere raiders. This was a war machine so sophisticated, so relentlessly efficient, that contemporary Europeans genuinely believed them to be God's punishment. They called them the horsemen of the apocalypse, and for good reason. Poland, conversely, was a scene of disarray. Divided into warring duchies governed by feuding princes who could barely agree on anything and situated directly on the doorstep of Western Europe. If one were to design a perfect victim for Mongol conquest, one couldn't devise anything better than 13th century Poland. Fractured, vulnerable, and directly in the path of armies that had just annihilated the Rus principalities. The Mongols were moving west, and Poland simply lay in their way. But before we delve into this first disastrous encounter, I want you to understand something crucial about the Mongols. These were not barbaric hordes. That was a mistake Europeans made then, and it's a mistake too many people make now. The Mongol army was the most advanced military force of its era, arguably of any era until the modern age. They possessed intelligence networks that modern spy agencies would envy. Their communication systems, employing riders and signal fires, could transmit messages thousands of miles. They had a tactical flexibility that European knights, trained for direct charges, could not match. And they had Subutai. If you don't know that name, you should. Subutai was arguably the greatest commander in human history, a general who won more battles over greater territory against a wider array of foes than anyone before or after him. He conquered northern China. He crushed the Rus army, and in 1241, he orchestrated the invasion of Europe with the precision of a chess grandmaster. The invasion plan was elegantly simple. 3 armies would strike Europe simultaneously. The main force, under Batu Khan, with Subutai as the strategic genius, would attack Hungary. This was the primary objective, the wealthiest kingdom in the heart of Europe. But Subutai understood that King Bela IV of Hungary had potential allies, Bohemia to the north, Poland to the northeast. Any of them could dispatch troops to aid Hungary, complicating matters. Therefore, before the main assault, these potential allies had to be neutralized. Poland's role in this grand strategy was straightforward. It served as a diversion. A small detachment of Mongol cavalry, numbering between 10,000 and 12,000 riders, commanded by Princes Baydar and Khadan, was to sweep through Poland like a wildfire. Their objective was not conquest for subjugation, nor was it the establishment of an occupational regime. Their main goal was destruction. They sought to burn cities to the ground, scatter enemy forces, sow panic, and crucially, ensure that no Polish army could travel south to assist the Hungarians. This was a secondary task, merely a footnote to the primary campaign. However, for Poland, it signaled a true apocalypse. The invasion began in the winter of 1240 to 1241 and unfolded with such terrifying speed that Poles struggled to comprehend it. European armies typically advanced slowly, burdened by supply trains and the logistical challenges of feudal militias. The Mongols, in stark contrast, moved with lightning quickness. Their horses covered distances in days that would take European armies weeks. They subsisted on whatever they could forage from the land. Each warrior carried dried meat and mare's milk, eliminating the need for slow-moving supply wagons. Their intelligence network, built upon captured prisoners and local informants, allowed them to pinpoint the exact location of every Polish detachment, even before the Poles themselves fully grasped their situation. Sutesk was the first city to fall. The Mongols descended upon it like a tempest. By the time they finished, almost nothing remained to be rebuilt. The city simply ceased to exist. It was so thoroughly erased from memory that historians still debate its precise location. Next came Lublin, a thriving trade hub. It too fell. Sandomierz, a major fortress expected to withstand weeks of siege, surrendered on February 13th after a brief assault. The Mongols plundered it anyway, as this was the message they intended to convey. Surrender or resist, the outcome would be identical. Terror was their weapon, and they wielded it with masterful precision. It was at this juncture that Poland's fragmentation proved fatal. Polish forces, had they united, might have numerically surpassed the Mongol invaders. Possibly. But unity necessitated coordination, demanded trust, and required warring princes to set aside their differences and act collectively. It demanded time, and time was the one thing the Mongols never granted their adversaries. At Tursko on February 13th, the Mongols engaged in their first significant battle on Polish soil. Lesser Poland's forces, led by a local voivode, confronted them in an open field. Polish knights, clad in mail armor atop heavy war horses, charged with all the valor and bravery extolled by their culture, and they rode directly into the oldest trick of Mongol tactics. The Mongol vanguard, light cavalry armed with composite bows, turned and fled. To the Polish knights, raised on tales of glorious charges and cavalry victories, this appeared to be a triumph. The enemy was fleeing. Pursue them, shatter their formation, claim glory. And so they galloped in pursuit, leaving their infantry far behind, disrupting their own formation in chase of what they believed to be a broken foe. It was a trap. It had always been a trap. A feigned retreat was a cornerstone of Mongol warfare, a tactic they employed to annihilate armies from China to Persia. The retreating Mongol cavalry lured the Polish knights into an ambush, where fresh units struck from the flanks, where their horses were exhausted and their formation shattered, where the weight of their armor became a liability instead of an advantage. And the Battle of Tursko was a massacre. The voivode perished on the field, and with him died Poland's first and best opportunity to halt the invasion. 5 days later, at Szemilnik, the scenario repeated itself. Another Polish contingent, this time including troops from Opatów and Sandomierz, met the Mongols in battle. Another feigned retreat, another devastating ambush, another slaughter. The pattern was now clear, but knowing the trap and avoiding it were two distinct matters. The Mongols were simply better at this than anyone the Poles had ever fought. And then came March 24th, when the Mongols reached Krakow itself. Here's what one must understand about medieval Krakow. It was no squalid backwater. It was among Central Europe's great cities, a center of commerce and culture, home to thousands of people, and protected by walls, towers, and every defensive innovation medieval engineering could offer. The Mongols surveyed it, consulted their schedule, reviewed their orders to press on and tie down Polish forces, and made a deliberate decision. They didn't even attempt to besiege it, they simply burned it. The populace fled, the Duke fled. The city stood largely empty, and the Mongols put it to the torch. Poland's largest city was engulfed in flames, and the Mongol army didn't even slow down. They had more pressing matters, because at that very moment, Duke Henrik II of Silesia was assembling the largest army Poland could possibly field. Henrik, a powerful nobleman in fragmented Poland, governed Silesia and held the title of High Duke. He grasped the gravity of the threat. If the Mongols weren't halted, they would sweep through Poland, then advance into Bohemia, Germany, and beyond. Consequently, he mobilized every available resource: his personal Silesian forces, soldiers from Greater Poland, knights from military orders, Templars and Hospitallers sent by the Pope himself, foreign volunteers, Bavarian miners, anyone prepared to fight. He made a crucial decision, abandoning Wrocław, Silesia's largest fortress and perhaps his most vital city, surrendering it to the Mongols without a fight. His reasoning was clear. Henrik was racing against time. His brother-in-law, Wenceslaus I, King of Bohemia, was en route with a substantial army. If Henrik could unite with the Bohemians, their combined strength might repel the Mongols. His sole task was to delay the Mongols long enough for the Bohemians to arrive. The Mongols, naturally, were aware of this. Their intelligence network was exceptional. They precisely knew Wenceslaus's location and how long it would take him to reach Henrik. They recognized the imperative to prevent this union.
Diverting from Wrocław, they abandoned their own siege and hastened to intercept Henrik's army before the Bohemians could join him. The two armies converged near the town of Legnica, at a place the Germans called Wahlstatt, the battlefield. What transpired there on April 9, 1241, would resonate through Polish history for centuries. The April dawn over the Legnica field was chillingly clear, almost mockingly so. After months of turmoil, burning cities, and desperate retreats, Henrik II finally had his opportunity. He had assembled between 25,000 and 30,000 men, the largest force fragmented Poland had mustered in a generation. He commanded knights from 3 distinct military orders, men sworn to combat Christianity's foes. He had his battle-hardened Silesians, troops from Greater Poland, cavalry from Opole, and even those Bavarian miners who had traveled so far to confront the Mongol onslaught. The Mongol army arrayed against him was smaller, contemporary estimates placing its numbers between 8,000 and 10,000 cavalry, possibly reduced by previous losses at Chemelnik and Tursko. On paper, Henrik possessed a numerical advantage. On paper, this should have been a moment of Polish triumph. On paper, the combined might of Christian Europe should have sufficed to stop what were essentially raiders, campaigning for months. But paper counts for nothing when facing Mongol generals who had honed the art of war their entire lives. Henrik divided his forces into 4 primary divisions, a standard medieval formation. Bavarian miners, under the command of Boleslaw of Moravia, formed one wing. Recruits from Greater Poland, led by Sulislav, brother of the fallen Castellan of Krakow, comprised another. The Opole army, commanded by Mieszko, occupied a 3rd position, while Henrik himself led the 4th division, consisting of his elite Silesians, Moravians, and knights from the military orders, the flower of Christian cavalry, men trained their whole lives for mounted combat, ready to charge under the banner of the cross. The Mongol army deployed with the deceptive simplicity characteristic of their tactics. Mangadai light cavalry formed the vanguard, skirmishers, harassers, horse archers capable of firing their composite bows with devastating accuracy from horseback. Behind them, unseen by the European forces, waited the heavier Mongol cavalry and the commanders who had masterminded victories from the Pacific to the Baltic. The battle commenced with a charge by the Silesian cavalry, Henrik's best-mounted troops, thundering forward to engage the Mongol vanguard. This was their training, the essence of their military culture: the attack, the strike, close-quarters combat. For a moment, it must have seemed to them that it was working.
the light Mongol cavalry retreated before the charge. They scattered, they fled, and every seasoned Mongol warrior on that field knew exactly what was happening, because they had executed this hundreds of times before. Did the Silesian cavalry pursue? Of course they pursued. Victory seemed imminent, and everything in their training, everything in their culture, instructed them that a fleeing enemy must be overtaken and destroyed. Behind them, the cavalry of Greater Poland and Opole, perceiving what looked like success, joined the attack. Thousands of heavily armored cavalry, the finest warriors of three kingdoms, churned across the field in pursuit of the light cavalry, which seemed to melt before them. And then it happened. The trap sprung. From the flanks, fresh Mongol units descended like hammers. The light cavalry, perfectly positioned, encircled the pursuing Europeans, and then came the smoke. Whether it was a groundbreaking smokescreen or merely the dust of battle, chroniclers of the era recounted a thick, dark haze that fell over the battlefield, obscuring Mongol movements and sowing panic among the European forces. These European detachments, having separated from their infantry and avidly pursued the retreating enemy, found themselves caught in a pincer movement. Polish cavalry suddenly faced a grim predicament. The Mongols, executing fluid maneuvers, would attack, feign retreat, then strike again, unleashing arrows from their bows with a precision honed over years in the saddle, all while mounted. Europeans, conditioned for a single, decisive charge, were thrust into a chaotic melee, where their strengths proved insignificant and their weaknesses were exploited fatally. The engagement devolved into a bloodbath. Some historical accounts suggest that 30,000 European warriors perished on that field, a figure undoubtedly exaggerated. However, even conservative estimations place the casualties in the thousands. The finest of the Polish nobility, knights of military orders, and volunteers who had come to defend Christendom all fell during a battle that lasted just a few hours. Prince Henrik II, realizing the battle was lost, attempted to escape the field with 3 bodyguards, but he didn't get far. Mongol cavalry overtook him, and on the blood-soaked grasses of Legnica, they killed him and decapitated his body. To utterly break any will to resist, they then impaled his head on a spear and displayed it before the walls of Legnica.
The man who was meant to save Poland became a mere war trophy. His wife, Anna, later identified his body by a distinctive trait. Henrik had 6 toes on his left foot. This intimate detail imbues the story with a heartbreaking quality. A woman sifting through piles of the dead, stripped of armor and dignity, searching for her husband by counting his toes. Let me be clear, this is where my bias surfaces. I've read numerous works on medieval military history, and the Battle of Legnica incites a rage in me that few other battles do. Not at the Mongols, who were brilliant tacticians executing a genius strategy, but at the stubborn refusal of European military culture to adapt. The Mongols had employed the feigned retreat for centuries, annihilating armies from China to Hungary with this very tactic. Yet Polish knights, so confident in their training, valor, and heavy armor, chased the retreating foe with the tactical sophistication of a bull charging a matador.
Bravery is no substitute for intellect, and valor is useless when you gallop straight into an obvious trap. If this also frustrates you, if you ponder how all of this might have been avoided had Europeans simply learned from their enemies instead of dismissing them as barbarians, let me know in the comments. Because we'll see this pattern repeat itself many times, and I want to know if you're as exasperated as I am, watching supposedly brilliant military minds make the same mistakes repeatedly. The immediate aftermath of Legnica plunged the region into chaos. King Wacław I of Bohemia, en route to rendezvous with Henrik, arrived a day late, only to find the Polish army obliterated. He retreated back to Bohemia, though his forces did repel a Mongol reconnaissance incursion near Kłodzko. Having accomplished their mission of neutralizing any potential aid to Hungary, the Mongols splintered into raiding parties. They devastated Moravia, terrorized Silesia, and pushed into Lusatia. Small contingents scoured the countryside, seizing whatever they desired, burning what they couldn't carry, leaving a trail of destruction that would take generations to rebuild. Just 2 days after Legnica, on April 11th, Another devastating blow struck. At the Battle of Mohi in Hungary, Subutai and Batu Khan annihilated the Hungarian royal army, killing between a quarter and half of Hungary's population in the subsequent campaign. Within a single week, two of Eastern Europe's most influential kingdoms were crushed. The path to Western Europe lay open. And then, something entirely unforeseen transpired. In December 1241, far in the Mongol capital of Karakorum, Ogedei Khan died. As the Great Khan, the supreme ruler of the Mongol Empire, his death necessitated that all princes of the blood return home for a Kurultai, the grand assembly that would elect his successor. Batu Khan, who had been planning to advance westward toward the Atlantic Ocean, was compelled to abandon his conquests and journey thousands of miles back across the steppe. Europe was saved not by military prowess, superior defenses, or some brilliant strategic counterstrike, but by pure chance, a death in Mongolia. The Mongols withdrew, and Western Europe breathed a sigh of relief. But for Poland, there was no relief. Legnica was an unmitigated disaster on all fronts. Henryk II's death set the reunification of Poland back by decades. The fragmentation that had initially undermined Poland's stability now became entrenched as competing heirs vied for scraps of his domains. Silesia, previously under Henryk's control, entirely slipped from Polish influence, eventually becoming part of the Bohemian crown. Cities like Sutesk never truly recovered. The psychological wounds inflicted ran deeper than the physical ones. Poland had comprehended the full might of the Mongol Empire's capabilities. It had first-hand experience of confronting the most formidable military machine the medieval world had ever witnessed. Poles recognized that bravery, heavy cavalry, and Christian faith were insufficient against an enemy whose mastery of warfare simply outmatched theirs. The crucial question was whether they would grasp the right lessons and adapt, or merely cling to the hope that such a nightmare would never recur. The reality was that in the mid-13th century, the Mongol Empire neither forgot nor forgave, and certainly did not cease expanding simply because one Khan had perished. The empire persisted under new leadership with renewed ambitions. Poland, situated directly on its border, squarely in the path to the affluent Western kingdoms, remained a target. Poland had a mere 18 years before the Mongols would return, 18 years to recuperate, fortify, and prepare. 18 years to learn from the catastrophe of 1241 and construct a defense capable of thwarting the next invasion. Much of this time, however, was squandered. Thus it was 1259. If you were a Polish peasant who had survived the initial invasion, the past 18 years would have been spent attempting to forget, rebuilding your village, reseeding your fields, or raising children who had never witnessed the horsemen with their recurved bows and ruthless efficiency. Perhaps you had begun to believe it was a singular disaster, an act of divine wrath that had passed, a nightmare that would not return. You would be gravely mistaken. In 1259, the Golden Horde, the western component of the Mongol Empire, now under the rule of Khan Burka, decided it was time to remind Poland who truly controlled the steppes to the east. This was not the large-scale, coordinated invasion of 1241. It was something almost more insulting, a raid. Two Tumans, roughly 20,000 horsemen led by Nogai Khan and General Burunde, swept into Poland with orders to punish, plunder, and remind the Poles that defiance carried consequences. They also had another motive. The Mongols laid claim to the Cumans, a Turkic people who had fled west as their subjects. Many Cumans had settled in Hungary and Poland, and the Mongols sought their return. Or at least, that was the pretense. The actual truth was simpler. The Golden Horde needed wealth. They needed to keep their warriors battle-ready, and Poland presented a convenient target. Lublin fell once more. Sieradz was sacked. Sandomierz, which had surrendered in 1241 hoping for clemency, was ravaged. Zawichost was obliterated. Koniecpol, painstakingly rebuilt over 18 years, was again destroyed. Tarnów burned. The second invasion swept through Poland like a scythe through summer wheat, leaving the Poles as helpless as they had been the first time. Yet, here is where an interesting detail emerges, offering the first hint of impending change.
This time, some fortifications managed to endure, albeit few. Not enough to halt the raid, but some stone strongholds were simply bypassed by the Mongols because they lacked the time or equipment for prolonged sieges. The Mongols were now raiders, not conquerors. They sought quick strikes, easy spoils, and swift retreats. Anything requiring a siege simply wasn't worth their effort. Pope Alexander IV attempted to organize a crusade against the Tatars, as Europeans called the Mongols, but to no avail. No one wished to confront an invincible empire, especially after it had just demonstrated, once again, its capacity to strike at the heart of Europe whenever it pleased. Meanwhile, in Hungary, a more intriguing development was unfolding. King Bela IV, a miraculous survivor of the Mohi catastrophe, had dedicated the past 18 years to an obsessive building program. Hundreds of stone castles rose throughout Hungary, transforming the kingdom from a land of wooden defenses into a network of stone strongholds. Bela grasped what many of his contemporaries did not. The Mongols could decimate armies in open battle, but siegecraft was not their forte. A kingdom that could retreat behind stone walls, that could force the Mongols into slow, exhausting sieges, could indeed survive. Poland, fragmented and impoverished, could not match Hungary's construction drive. Some fortifications were modernized, a few cities received stone walls, but the systemic transformation experienced by Hungary simply did not occur. Poland remained vulnerable, and everyone knew it. Another 27 years passed. A generation grew up hearing tales of the two invasions, stories that likely became increasingly terrifying with each retelling. Tales of horsemen who drank blood, of warriors who could shoot arrows backward at a full gallop. Armies moved faster than news could spread. Some parts of the historical accounts were clearly exaggerated, yet a significant portion accurately depicted events. Over those 27 years, Poland wasn't instantly or dramatically transformed, but rather gradually rebuilt, piece by piece, from the ashes of 1241 and 1259, giving rise to a new state. The central figure in this resurgence was a man who likely never envisioned himself as a hero, nor did he anticipate saving his realm from the Mongol Empire. His name was Leszek II, historically known as Leszek the Black, perhaps due to his dark hair or a solemn disposition. He ascended as the High Duke of Poland in 1279, inheriting a fragmented state where the High Duke's title carried less weight than it should have. Leszek wasn't a warrior king akin to the legendary Boleslav the Brave. He was a politician who navigated complex circumstances, understanding that strength lay in unity and proactive preparation, not in glorious but reckless assaults. In 1282, merely 3 years into his reign, this insight faced a severe test when the nobility rebelled. The intricacies of medieval Polish politics are convoluted and, frankly, rather tedious. However, some key events unfolded. In 1285, Leszek confronted a major uprising led by powerful nobles, including Oto Portich, the Sandomierz voivode. The rebels effectively expelled Leszek from Poland, forcing him to seek refuge and assistance in Hungary, the very country that had become a fortified state. On May 3, 1285, at the Battle of Bogucice, Leszek returned with Hungarian backing and crushed the rebellion. This was a decisive victory that not only defeated his enemies, but annihilated them. From that point, Leszek's rule became more stable, centralized, and capable of concrete action. What actions did he take? Primarily, he focused on fortifications, many fortifications. Krakow Castle, twice burned by the Mongols, was entirely rebuilt in stone, not wood, which could burn, or earth, which could crumble, but stone, capable of withstanding fire and siege engines. The castle was equipped with catapults and crossbows, weapons capable of striking back at attackers. Sandomierz received similar upgrades, and Tumlin was fortified. Even the Wysogrod Abbey in the Świętokrzyski Mountains, a monastery typically defenseless against raiders, was converted into a defensive stronghold. While not a monumental construction program on the scale of Hungary's, it was substantial. For the first time since the Mongol incursions began, Poland was preparing, not hoping, not praying, but genuinely preparing for the inevitable return of the Eastern threat.
I'd like to pause here to discuss what I believe is crucial for understanding how the third invasion differed. The first two times the Mongols attacked Poland, they encountered a reactive kingdom. React to the invasion when it happens. React to the army when it arrives. React to the siege when it begins. Everything was reactive, defensive, in the worst sense of the word. What Leszek was quietly and steadily doing was transforming Poland into a proactive state, constructing defenses before an army's arrival, planning strategy before a siege commences, and contemplating how to wage the next war, not the last. This seemingly simple shift is what distinguishes a victim from a survivor. It's the difference between hoping for luck and creating one's own. And in 1287, as Nogai Khan began assembling his forces for the third invasion of Poland, this transformation was about to prove paramount. If you're enjoying this story of resurgence, a shattered kingdom slowly gathering strength to stand against an empire, be sure to subscribe, because what follows will be the payoff for all this preparation. And I promise you, it's worth it. In November 1287, Nogai Khan, one of the Golden Horde's most formidable commanders, dispatched a message to the Rus princes, who were Mongol vassals controlling the lands between the steppe and Poland. The message was straightforward: assemble your armies and join me against Poland. This was not a request, but an order from someone capable of crushing any who refused. The Galician Volhynian Chronicle describes what Nogai gathered as a vast host, 30,000 cavalry, an immense force by medieval warfare standards. This wasn't a raid like in 1259. It was a serious military operation intended to punish Poland for perceived affronts and to prevent High Duke Leszek from meddling in Hungarian and Rus politics. The plan was intricate. 2 columns would invade simultaneously. The northern column, 20,000 men including Romanian vassals under Talabuga Khan, would advance towards Sandomierz and northern Lesser Poland. The southern column, 10,000 pure Mongol and Turkic cavalrymen under Nogai himself, would head for Krakow and the region around Stary Sącz. The two forces would plunder their respective areas and then rendezvous north of Krakow, after which they would travel a predetermined route that would devastate central Poland. Subsequently, their intention was to make their way back to Rus. Their steeds would be laden with spoils, and their renown would be solidified. This was a flawless scheme, one that had proven its efficacy twice before and regarded Poland as an easy target destined for conquest rather than a formidable adversary. However, for the first time in nearly 50 years, Poland was poised to challenge these assumptions. On December 7, 1287, Khan Talabuga led his 20,000-strong cavalry west from their encampment near Vladimir towards Poland. It was winter, a period when medieval armies traditionally withdrew to their winter quarters, awaiting spring. Yet the Mongols consistently grasped that a sudden assault was the pivotal element of a triumphant strategy. Winter also brought frozen rivers, which served as natural pathways for cavalry. The season that crippled European forces merely accelerated the Mongols. Nevertheless, the Vistula remained unfrozen. The river, which should have provided a convenient route, was still flowing, compelling Talabuga's army to search for fords by moving south along its banks. This resulted in a loss of time and, more crucially, the forfeiture of the element of surprise. This marked the initial holdup, the first indication that this incursion would differ from preceding ones. Once the Mongols arrived at Sandomierz fortress, they anticipated encountering what they had witnessed on 2 prior occasions: easily flammable wooden walls, terrified defenders eager to surrender without a fight, and a straightforward victory that would set the tone for the entire campaign. Instead, they were met with stone. The citadel, which had fallen so swiftly in 1241, had undergone a complete reconstruction. It now boasted stone walls, was well provisioned, adequately supplied, and defended by a resolute garrison, with catapults on the ramparts and crossbowmen in the towers. The Mongols laid siege to it and failed. For the first time in 3 invasions of Poland, a large Mongol army was unable to capture a significant fortification. Sandomierz held firm, and Talabuga's army, which had planned to plunder the city and use it as a base, was forced to abandon the siege and continue the campaign without this triumph. This incident was monumental in its significance. Its importance cannot be overstated. Mongol strategy relied on momentum, speed, and the psychological impact of an irresistible advance. Each instance they failed to achieve an objective, each time they had to bypass a fortress or forego a siege, their aura of invincibility suffered. And in medieval warfare, morale and reputation were as vital as actual combat effectiveness. Talabuga divided his forces. This was a customary Mongol tactic. Small detachments were dispatched for raiding, gathering intelligence, and keeping the enemy in perpetual apprehension. One detachment approached the Vislitsa Abbey in the Sventokrsky Mountains, while another headed towards the town of Tursk, and all of them encountered fortified positions and local forces that, sallying forth, engaged them in minor skirmishes. This was Leszek's strategy in action, not to confront the Mongols in one large pitched battle, where their superior cavalry tactics could annihilate another Polish army, but instead to compel them to disperse, force them to attack entrenched positions, and allow local garrisons to wear them down. The Mongols' advantage lay in mobility and tactical flexibility in open-field combat. Remove the open terrain, and you strip them of their advantage. On December 20th, 1287, something remarkable transpired in the Sventokrsky Mountains, near a place called Wagu. Prince Leszek II, leading the Polish forces, whose numbers sources describe as unknown but significant, caught up with Talabuga's main column. The Mongols, in search of easier targets, had dispersed their forces too widely, and suddenly found themselves facing a concentrated Polish army in terrain unfavorable to cavalry maneuvers. The Battle of Wagu was not a massive engagement. We lack detailed accounts of tactics or precise casualty figures. What we do possess is the outcome, and that outcome is astounding. The Poles were victorious. This was not a Pyrrhic victory. It was not a temporary setback for the Mongols. This was a genuine, decisive defeat, after which Talabuga's army retreated. Sources describe it as quite serious. Talabuga's detachments withdrew to the Kielce region and then began a full-scale retreat, taking all the plunder they had already gathered and abandoning any further campaign. By January 1288, they had returned to their winter camp in Lviv, and the northern invasion was complete. To reiterate, as this is immensely important, for the first time in the history of Mongol-Polish conflicts, a Mongol army suffered defeat in battle and was driven out of Poland. And this occurred not by fortunate coincidence or due to the death of a Khan in distant steppes, but through Polish arms, Polish strategy, and Polish resolve. Meanwhile, Leszek was not celebrating. He immediately moved his army south towards Kolobrzeg because he knew that Nogai's southern column was still active, and Kolobrzeg was their objective. Nogai crossed into Polish territory on December 24th, Christmas Eve, with 10,000 Mongol and Turkic horsemen. This time, there were no auxiliary Russian units. It was a pure Mongol force, the type that had terrorized Europe for 2 generations, and their target was the same city they had burned down twice before, Krakow. The city waiting for them now was vastly different from what it had been in 1241 or 1259. Its walls were now stone, massive and tall. The once sparse wooden and earth citadel had transformed into an impenetrable fortress, capable of withstanding any assault from medieval siege engines. The garrison was fully prepared for defense, armed with its own siege weapons, catapults, large and small crossbows, and an arsenal specifically designed for defensive combat. Nogai's troops launched an assault, but were repelled with immense casualties. Contemporaries particularly noted that the Mongols lost several commanders during the attack on Krakow. These were experienced generals who had fought in countless campaigns, and they fell trying to capture a city that should have been easy prey for them. Nogai, confronted with an impregnable fortress he couldn't quickly seize, and aware of Talabuga's northern column's defeat, made a tactical decision. He split his army into smaller detachments and resorted to what the Mongols did best, raiding. If he couldn't take Krakow, he would devastate the surrounding area. His forces dispersed across regions north and south of the city, ransacking villages and engaging in minor skirmishes with local detachments, sallying forth from towns and castles. 2 more of Nogai's detachments pushed southward into the mountains. One besieged Podolinik, which they eventually managed to capture after clashes with local militias, albeit at a considerable cost. The other laid siege to Stary Sats, a well-fortified town in the foothills that was perfectly prepared for such an eventuality. Stary Sats was an ideal illustration of how Poland had changed. The town was provisioned, its walls were strong, and the garrison consisted of local knights and armed peasants who knew they were fighting for their homes. The siege dragged on for a month, but the Mongols achieved nothing. Each day spent at those walls was a day they weren't plundering or accumulating spoils, which depleted their supplies and horses. Meanwhile, Leszek II was executing the boldest part of his strategy. Leaving his troops to defend Krakow, he, along with his wife and a small retinue of servants, secretly departed Poland and made a desperate dash to Hungary. He intended to accomplish what Henrik II had attempted in 1241, to attract allies, secure reinforcements, and create a force capable not just of defense, but of offense. Ladislaus IV, the King of Hungary, fully grasped Leszek II's predicament. Just 2 years prior, in 1285, Ladislaus IV had crushed another Mongol invasion of Hungary. The extensive castle-building program initiated by Bela IV was paying off, and Hungary had learned to effectively combat the Mongols. When Leszek II requested assistance, Ladislaus IV did not hesitate. He entrusted a Hungarian nobleman named George of Słower with leading an expeditionary force into Poland. George assembled his troops and began marching north from Podoliniec and Keźmierok, picking up Polish detachments along the way. The Hungarian-Polish alliance was forming and heading directly towards the Mongol forces besieging Stary Sach. The Mongols had no inkling of their approach. But before we delve into that crucial battle, I must tell you about the Highlanders. For while great armies maneuvered and nobles strategized, the common folk of Poland waged their own war. The Gorals are the inhabitants of the highlands, of Podhale, mountaineers living in the Carpathian foothills. They are not knights, nor professional soldiers. They are shepherds, farmers, and artisans who know their mountains as sailors know the sea. And when Mongol detachments invaded their territory, the Gorals took up any available weapon and fought back. According to local legend, which likely contains a kernel of truth, a Mongol detachment encountered the local Highlanders in the Kasula Valley. The Gorals attacked Mongol camps along the Dunajec River and effectively drove them from the region. This was not a large-scale battle with formations and cavalry charges. It was guerrilla warfare. The Highlanders used their knowledge of the terrain to ambush raiders accustomed to fighting on open steppes. The Mongols, who had conquered armies from China to Hungary, were halted by Polish shepherds who refused to let their homes be burned without a fight. And this speaks volumes about how different this third invasion was. It wasn't just about fortifications, strategy, or leadership. It was because Poland, from top to bottom, had decided that Poland would not be a victim. So, in January 1288, the Hungarian-Polish forces under George of Słower neared Stary Sach. The Mongol army besieging the city, numbering about 1,000 men, had been there for a month. Fatigued and discouraged, they focused intently on the ramparts before them, rather than their rear. George's detachment struck them like a bolt of lightning. The element of surprise was absolute. The Mongol contingent, caught between the garrison sallying forth from the town and reinforcements attacking from behind, was annihilated. Not merely defeated or repelled, but annihilated. Historical records leave no doubt on this matter. The combined Hungarian-Polish forces, completely unexpectedly, assaulted a Mongol unit numbering 1,000 men and wiped it out. Their commander was slain, and the entire detachment crushed. This marked the final significant engagement of the Third Mongol invasion of Poland, culminating in a complete victory for the Poles. Nogai Khan, upon receiving intelligence of the defeat near Stary Sach, aware of Talabuga's retreat, and observing Leszek II mobilizing the main Polish forces, further bolstered by Hungarian allies, drew his conclusions. His troops were dispersed, while his adversaries were consolidating. His planned rendezvous with Talabuga would not materialize. Had he lingered, his entire army risked encirclement and destruction. Consequently, Nogai Khan withdrew from Poland in late January 1288. The third invasion concluded, and for the first time in history, the Mongols departed Poland not as conquerors, nor as successful pillagers, but as a vanquished army.
Let's delve into what truly transpired, as the significance of the third invasion extends far beyond a single successful defense. This was no accident, nor was it mere luck. It represented a systematic undermining of Mongol strategy by a kingdom that had spent 47 years mastering the art of survival. Let's compare these three invasions. In 1241, Poland suffered approximately 30,000 casualties solely at Legnica. Krakow was burned, Wrocław abandoned without a fight. Sandomierz surrendered and was plundered regardless. The Mongols cut through Poland like a scythe through a field, achieving all their objectives and leaving desolation in their wake. In 1259, history repeated itself. Lublin, Sieradz, Sandomierz, Krakow, all were pillaged. The Poles could not halt them, barely slowing their advance. The only reason things weren't worse was that, this time, the Mongols were raiders, not conquerors, and they departed once they had what they sought. In 1287 to 1288, the Mongols failed to capture a single major city or castle. Sandomierz held, Krakow held, Stary Sądz held. They did seize some villages and minor towns, of course, but nothing substantial. They incurred significant personnel losses, including seasoned commanders. They suffered a genuine military setback at Wagu and total destruction at Stary Sądz, then retreated, abandoning their objectives and cutting short their campaign. Historian Stefan Kowaliński identifies two primary reasons for this dramatic turning point. Firstly, the Mongol leadership was fragmented. Talabuga and Nogai's coordination was poor, possibly due to rivalry or strategic disagreements. When Talabuga retreated after his defeat, Nogai was left exposed, and a divided invasion force is a weak invasion force. But the second reason is the one that truly matters. Poland's revamped fortifications rendered settlements far more challenging to seize, enabling Leszek II and his nobility to implement a three-phase defensive plan that was, frankly, ingenious in its simplicity. The first phase involved passive defense by garrisons. Fortified cities and castles held their ground, refused to be intimidated, and compelled the Mongols either to lay siege or bypass them. Each bypassed stronghold served as a sanctuary for the local populace and a base for future operations. The second phase involved sorties by local forces to combat smaller Mongol detachments. This aspect often receives insufficient attention. While the main Mongol armies were formidable, their smaller raiding parties were vulnerable. Polish forces from fortified positions could strike at these detachments, harass them, inflict losses, and retreat behind their walls. The death by 1,000 cuts led to the third phase, a counterattack by a large, unified Polish-Hungarian army against the scattered and weakened Mongols. This is precisely what unfolded at Stary Sądz. And this is precisely what would have happened to Nogai's entire force had he remained in Poland. Once the Mongols were dispersed, once they were weakened by casualties and minor defeats, they could not resist. This strategy was elegant, effective, and a complete reversal of the approach Poland employed in 1241 when they attempted to confront the Mongols in open field battle and were decimated. Now, I want to clarify something because, in my view, history tends to overcorrect and begin viewing a defeated nation as incompetent. The Mongols were not incompetent. They remained one of the most proficient military powers in the world. Their cavalry tactics still outmatched European knights in open engagements. Their strategic planning remained sophisticated. However, warfare involves more than just tactics. It demands adaptability. It means learning from past errors and adjusting one's approach. The Mongols clung to the very same tactics that had brought them success across 2 generations and 3 continents. Poland, though, altered the rules of engagement. They wisely avoided attempting to overpower the Mongols using cavalry tactics, realizing it was a losing proposition. Instead, they devised circumstances where the Mongolian mounted warrior methods became less potent, thereby negating the Mongols' established advantages. Stone fortresses remain unimpressed by the skill of horse archers. A feigned retreat holds no sway against solid stone walls, which simply stand firm, compelling you to either deploy siege machinery you don't possess or to withdraw. And every day spent wrestling with how to overcome these fortifications
is a day lost in achieving your objectives. The human element also played a crucial part. Leszek II often doesn't receive enough credit for this triumph. He wasn't a mythical warrior, nor did he lead glorious cavalry charges. He was a politician and an administrator who grasped that preparation and strategy eclipsed mere courage and improvisation. He oversaw the construction of defenses, organized the resistance, and undertook a perilous diplomatic journey to Hungary to secure Allied support. He coordinated a three-phase defensive scheme across a still fragmented kingdom. Let's also commend the Polish populace. From the knights defending the ramparts to the Highlanders ambushing Mongol raiders in the mountains, the shift between 1241 and 1287 wasn't solely about fortifications. It was a testament to the will to resist, the determination to fight, and the refusal to simply bow to the Mongol threat's perceived inevitability. This is what truly strikes me, and I confess, I get a little emotional recounting this narrative. Poland in 1287 wasn't a dominant power. It wasn't wealthy. It wasn't unified. It didn't possess the resources of Hungary or the advanced military sophistication of the Teutonic Knights. What did it have? It had the institutional memory of two devastating defeats and an unwavering resolve to prevent a third. That is incredibly powerful. This is the kind of historical moment that reminds us that defeat doesn't have to be final, that learning from your mistakes is more crucial than never making them. Poland suffered two crushing defeats, then rose, erected stone walls, assimilated its lessons, and when the Mongols returned, anticipating an easy victory, Poland annihilated their army and forced their retreat. If this doesn't stir you, check your pulse, and if it does, please share in the comments what you believe was the most decisive factor in Poland's victory. Was it the fortifications, the strategy, the leadership, the alliance with Hungary, or simply the sheer determination of a people who refused to be conquered? I genuinely want to hear your perspectives. The ramifications of the Third Invasion resonated throughout Eastern Europe. The Mongols never invaded Poland again. Reflect on that for a moment. They invaded 3 times in under 50 years, and then, after 1288, they simply stopped. Poland had demonstrated that an invasion was no longer worth the cost. The defenses were too formidable, the organization of the defense was too robust, and the likelihood of defeat was too real. The Golden Horde consequently shifted its focus to other territories. When they needed to exert influence over Poland, they resorted to diplomacy and threats rather than actual invasion. By 1356, Casimir III the Great even reached an accord with the Golden Horde, ostensibly agreeing to pay tribute for military assistance against other adversaries. This agreement acknowledged Mongol authority without demanding actual subservience. However, the psychological impact extended beyond just Poland. The Mongols were repelled, not by the mighty kingdoms of Western Europe with their colossal castles and professional armies, nor by military orders with decades of crusading experience, but by Poland, a divided, relatively impoverished nation still recuperating from prior invasions. If Poland could achieve this, then anyone could. The aura of Mongol invincibility, already eroded by their failure to fully subjugate Hungary in the 1280s, suffered yet another critical blow. The empire that had terrorized Europe for 2 generations proved, if not entirely beatable under all circumstances, then at least not unstoppable. And that, to me, is particularly satisfying about this story. The Mongols succeeded when they leveraged their superior mobility, better intelligence, and more fluid tactics. All those advantages were genuine, but Poland triumphed by doing something even simpler. They constructed walls and defended them. They didn't attempt to outmaneuver the Mongols at their own game. They simply rendered the Mongols' advantages irrelevant. This highlights a lesson in asymmetric warfare. You don't defeat a superior foe by fighting on their terms. You alter the terms. You establish conditions where their strengths become irrelevant, and your strengths matter. The Mongols excelled in mobile combat. Thus, Poland removed mobile warfare from the equation. Fighting from fortifications, forcing sieges, compelling them to come to you. This very principle later assisted other kingdoms in resisting Mongol expansion. It's also the underlying reason the Mongols never conquered Western Europe. despite possessing the military capability to do so. Fortification coupled with resolve forms a potent combination, particularly when attackers operate far from their supply bases. The legend of the Laconic, Krakow's unofficial symbol, supposedly dates back to this invasion period itself. It is said that in December 1287, during a siege, a Polish contingent discovered a Mongol encampment beyond the city walls. They launched a surprise assault, eradicating several Mongol warlords, including the siege commander. One of the Poles donned the commander's armor, mounted a wooden horse, and rode through Krakow in celebration of the victory. Did this truly occur? Probably not in every minute detail. Medieval tales rarely adhere to strict historical accuracy. However, Krakow's annual Laconic festival, celebrated since at least the 14th century, embodies something genuine, the memory of an improbable triumph. A Pole, disguised as a Mongol, galloping through the streets, as if declaring, "We defeated you. We remember and will never forget what we achieved." Leszek II passed away on September 30th, 1288, less than a year after the Mongols retreated. He was interred in the Dominican Church of the Holy Trinity in Krakow, the city he saved. He did not live to see the full unification of Poland, nor its transformation into a leading European power. Yet he lived long enough to witness Poland withstand the greatest military threat of the Middle Ages and emerge victorious. And that is enough, more than enough. I have dedicated considerable time to recounting Poland's victory over the Mongols. But now I wish to step back from the specifics and reflect on the significance of this narrative, what elevates it beyond a mere intriguing medieval footnote. Firstly, it stands as a testament to institutional learning. Poland overcame the Mongols not because Poles suddenly became superior fighters or discovered some secret weapon. They achieved victory because they learned from their defeats. Two invasions taught them what worked and what didn't. Open field battles proved fruitless. Wooden fortifications were ineffective. Divided command also failed. So they adapted.
Instead, they utilized stone fortresses, a unified defensive strategy, and coordinated actions with allies. They literally built their victory upon the bedrock of past failures. How often throughout history have we observed individuals, organizations, and entire nations repeating the same mistakes? How frequently do we see someone, after experiencing failure, instead of learning, try the same approach again, hoping for a different outcome? Poland could have done likewise. After 1259, they might have simply rebuilt and hoped the Mongols wouldn't return. Instead, they operated under the assumption that the Mongols would return and prepared accordingly. This mindset distinguishes survivors from victims. Survivors anticipate the worst and make provisions for it. They don't just hope for the best, they work to optimize the situation. And when crisis strikes, they are ready. Secondly, this is a tale of asymmetric warfare.
The Mongols possessed every advantage in mobile combat: superior horses, expert archers, refined tactics, and precise coordination. Engaging them on an open field was destined for defeat. Europeans, however, stubbornly persisted in their attempts because cavalry charges were what they understood, what their culture celebrated, and the foundation of their entire military system. By 1287, Poland recognized that it wasn't necessary to fight on the enemy's terms. One could establish one's own conditions, compelling the adversary into situations where their advantages became meaningless. The Mongols were mobile, so fighting should occur from static positions. They excelled in open terrain, so defense should be from fortifications. They sought swift victories, so protracted sieges should be imposed on them. This remains pertinent today in any competitive scenario, whether military, business, sports, or otherwise. You will inevitably encounter adversaries who surpass you in certain aspects. The question is whether you will attempt to defeat them on their own ground or alter the rules of the game. Poland altered the game, and it succeeded. Thirdly, and this genuinely resonates with me, it's a story of resilience. Poland in 1287 was not a superpower. It had been devastated twice, it was fragmented, it was impoverished.
It had every reason to simply accept the Mongols' invincibility and attempt to accommodate them by paying tribute or doing whatever it took to stave off another invasion. Instead, they fought, prepared, and adapted. And when the Mongols returned, expecting another easy victory, Poland stood firm and sent them home defeated. This matters significantly.
In a world where it often appears that the powerful always prevail, where resistance seems futile, and the sensible option is simply to accept one's fate, Poland's victory in 1287 served as a reminder that the outcome is not predetermined. Preparation, resolve, and strategic thinking can overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. I'm not claiming that victory comes easily, or that the weak always triumph. That's untrue, and it's pointless to pretend it is. I'm suggesting that the underdog has a chance if they are intelligent, if they learn, and if they adapt. Poland proved this. Now, let's discuss what transpired afterward. The Mongol Empire persisted for another century and a half. However, its expansion westward concluded after the setbacks in Poland and Hungary in the 1280s. The empire fragmented into separate uluses, whose rulers were more preoccupied with internal conflicts than with conquering Europe. The Golden Horde maintained its influence in Eastern Europe, but its power waned and it vanished by the 15th century. Meanwhile, Poland gradually unified, a process that took another generation. But in 1320, Władysław Łokietek was crowned king of a reunited Poland. The kingdom, fragmented and vulnerable in 1241, evolved into one of the leading powers of late medieval Europe, eventually forming the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which dominated Eastern Europe for centuries. None of this was predestined. Had Poland fallen in 1287, had the Mongols emerged victorious in their third invasion, the entire course of European history could have shifted. Poland's actual persistence, its ability to learn from defeats and establish a defensive system robust enough to repel invaders, altered the historical trajectory. This leads me to the final crucial point I wish to emphasize. History is not a chronicle of inevitable forces and preordained outcomes. It is a narrative of choices. Poland chose to construct stone fortresses. Leszek II decided to seek assistance in Hungary. The Sandomierz garrison opted for steadfastness. The Highlanders chose resistance. Each of these decisions held significance. The Mongols decided to employ the same tactics that had brought them success previously. Talabuga and Nogai failed to coordinate their actions effectively. Individual Mongol commanders chose to assault Kaunas instead of bypassing it. These decisions were also significant. Ultimately, one set of decisions led to victory, the other to defeat. That is how history functions, not through inevitability, but through the cumulative effect of thousands of individual decisions, some grand, some minor, but all important. So, when you reflect on your life and your challenges, remember Poland in 1287. Remember that defeat doesn't have to be conclusive. Remember that you can learn, adapt, and alter the terms of the struggle. Remember that stone walls and determination can halt seemingly invincible armies. And if this narrative resonated with you, if it reshaped your understanding of resilience, strategy, or the nature of victory, please do me a favor. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, because I have more stories like this. Stories about historical moments that reveal deeper truths about how the world operates. Leave a comment and share which lesson from Poland's victory you found most significant, because I'm genuinely interested in hearing what resonated with you. Share this video with anyone who needs a story about overcoming incredible odds. Because in a world that often seems governed by forces too mighty to combat, we all need reminders that resistance is not futile, that learning from setbacks is possible, and that sometimes, just sometimes, the underdog prevails. Poland confronted the Mongol Empire 3 times. Twice it fell. Once it stood firm, and that single instance was enough to alter history. The riders of the apocalypse invaded Poland, anticipating another effortless triumph. They encountered stone walls, resolute defenders, and a kingdom that had learned from its mistakes. They discovered a Poland that refused to be a victim any longer, and they never returned. This is the power of resilience, the power of learning from failures. This is the power of refusing to accept defeat as inevitable. Poland in 1287 proved that the impossible is merely the difficult. something no one has yet figured out how to accomplish. They found a way. Stone by stone, strategy by strategy, battle by battle, they forged victory on the ruins of 2 previous defeats. If they managed this feat against the mightiest military force of the medieval era, despite their limited resources and a fragmented kingdom, what justification do you have? Erect your defenses, derive lessons from your setbacks, and fundamentally alter the dynamics of the conflict.